Listen, I know what you're thinking. It's a ridiculous proposition. Karl Marx is the antithesis to everything we stand for on the right. He is a pseudo-economist and an ideologue whose ideas have destroyed Western culture. And anyone who suggests the right could ever benefit from his writings is either a moron, a subversive, or likely both. Now, I imagine a lot of you won't be able to look beyond such dogmatically held positions, but for the rest of you who are capable of keeping an open mind, I invite you to let go of your preconceived notions and just hear me out here. I'm not asking you to become a Marxist. I'm not a Marxist. But like him or not, Marx was a smart guy, with a lot of interesting ideas, and I think the right could stand to benefit by understanding them. It is one of these ideas that I want to explore in this video. Now, Marx is best known for his critique of capitalism, which mostly centers on capitalism's inherently exploitative nature, how it's oppressive and unfair, and so on. As a result, leftists who adopt his line of thinking advocate for diminishing that oppressive hierarchy, if not outright dismantling it. But the left is not alone in its criticizing of capitalism's unequal nature. Distributists, who are distinctively right-wing, for example, are critical of the tendency of a few capitalists to consolidate large amounts of wealth, because it disrupts the competitiveness that innovation requires. However, they don't go so far as to object to the employer-employee relationship, only to when it becomes excessively exploitative, perhaps because they don't see anything innately wrong with hierarchy. And so, for the most part, when right-wingers criticize capitalism, they only criticize a certain state of capitalism, a state that can be solved. But crucially, the solution cannot sustain itself forever, and capitalism tends back to its undesirable nature. In this sense, right-wingers don't go far enough with their criticism. The problem lies within capitalism itself. Now, why does this happen? We'll turn to Marx, who opens his magnum opus, Das Kapital, with the following. The wealth of societies dominated by the capitalist mode of production appears in the form of an quote-unquote enormous accumulation of commodities. Hence, our investigation begins by analyzing the commodity. A commodity is a produced item made to be consumed or used. Because of this, they have what Marx called a use value. A food is an item to be eaten, a screwdriver is meant to screw, an electronic chip is used in the production of smartphones, and so on. This is value, the reason these things exist in the first place. But it's not the entirety of value. There is also the exchange value, which is the value a commodity has in exchange for another commodity. Now, Marx thought that a commodity's exchange value was determined by the labor required to produce it. This isn't so important for our purposes, but the bottom line is that in a capitalist society, commodities' exchange values are represented by monetary values, by money. But money is not only the universal representative of exchange values, but also the common facilitator of exchange, so it has not only exchange value, but also a use value. It too exists for a specific purpose with an accompanying utility. Money's use value is in fact so great that it practically exceeds the use value of all commodities. This makes sense. A commodity is confined to one or a few uses, some not immediately apparent, and the value of that utility can differ from person to person and their respective situation. But money's status makes it so that every commodity is worth some amount of it. So if you get more money, every use value will become available to you. And on top of that, money doesn't expire or spoil, and everyone wants it, especially wealthy capitalists who are competing with each other and could benefit from the security that capital grants them. With all this having been said, it finally becomes clear why exactly wealth inequality always resurfaces after having been temporarily reduced. Money, by representing the exchange value of commodities, becomes more useful than those commodities. As a result, people hoard it as much as possible, and those with the most have the opportunity to hoard even more. This, at least, answers our initial question about wealth inequality. It's not just a problem for certain forms of capitalism, rather, it is a problem innate to capitalism and currency themselves. But in light of this, a much deeper problem emerges, which Marx called commodity fetishism. Now, the word economy comes from the Greek oikonomos, which roughly means household management. Thus, the entire purpose of an economy is, well, the management of the household, the distribution and allocation of resources. Commodities fill a specific need in this household. I buy the food commodity because otherwise I'll starve. But if money becomes more useful than the commodities, then the commodities lose their original purpose. Instead of being consumed or used as intended, and this being the center of economics, commodities become more valuable as a means to acquire more capital, and as such, money becomes central instead. In other words, commodities become no more than fetishes. Let's look at it from another perspective. Most of the time, people sell their labor in exchange for money so they can buy what they need to live. You produce something, get money, and use it to purchase a commodity. This is how most economic activity worked historically, barring some exceptions. A commodity, C, was produced and sold for money, M, in order to buy an essential commodity, C, CMC. But the prominence of money permits the exact opposite type of economic activity, where you start out with capital and use it to buy a commodity to resell at a higher price, MCM. This essentially creates ways to make money without having contributed any use value, or, as Marx put it, and so when value is valorized, in money, it is valorizing itself. It has acquired the occult ability to add value by virtue of being value. It spits out live children, or at least lays golden eggs. These methods are mostly at the disposal of the investor class, those with a lot of capital. As I said, most people follow the pattern of CMC, and here the commodity is the final goal. The barrier of entry MCM requires is usually outside most people's grasp. However, most people today do have disposable incomes, and a good portion of our consumption is of non-essential things. Many leftists focus on the security of the lower class, but up until relatively recently, those lower classes only resided in very small quantities in very specific parts of the world. Now, when people get money, some might save it and some might invest it. For the most part, people spend the money on consuming commodities. Some commodities are bought with some creative or artistic purpose in mind, but most commodities are bought to be consumed more or less immediately and rebought again. These types of commodities can take on various forms: fast food, fashion, media, and so on. Yes, they have use value, or you wouldn't have bought them, but what is their primary use, and why were they produced in the first place? To be consumed as intended, or to make money for those who sell it? Why else would they be designed in those ways, except to cheaply appeal to our senses? If a commodity's primary purpose was its use value, it would be advertised as such. But it's not. These commodities are sold to be consumed and nothing else, only so a profit can be made. Commodities, then, are no longer relevant for the management of the household. They're mere fetishes, alienated from that original purpose, not unlike how Marx described workers as alienated from their true nature. Their current purpose is for profit, or at the very least, they're more useful to the capitalist than the consumer. In the case of a small business owner, the problem may not be as bad, but remember, commodity fetishism is not the fault of capitalists. It's a trait and fault of capital itself. Some people, of course, don't think this is a problem at all. But remember, commodity fetishism ultimately affects everyone's behaviors. In fact, it cannot exist without people in the first place, as it only exists when there are people whose behaviors can be affected, and who can judge money to be more useful than what it buys. The rich learn the art of replicating capital's ability to increase its own value with productivity, and consumers begin to spend money as soon as they get it, which is especially pernicious when it comes to that spontaneous consumerism, the sort one doesn't plan for, and is the result of one's pockets feeling heavy. What's been laid out here is fundamentally what should concern the right, and what the right can learn from Marx. As he said himself, ancient society condemned money as corrosive to the economic and moral order. While modern society was still in its infancy, it pulled Pluto by the hair from the bowels of the earth, and now it salutes the Gold Grail as the shining incarnation of its most fundamental life principle. As I said, this economic environment does affect people's behaviors and ultimately the culture as a whole, and in ways that the right should abhor. A society which is or seeks to be virtuous, but centers itself around the endless accumulation of capital, will soon abandon virtue. Real, qualitative value has been subverted by an illusory quantitative value. A big focus of modern politics is the increasing of living standards, which amounts to larger disposable incomes. But these disposable incomes' only purpose is to facilitate even more consumption. Consumption with no purpose or end. All we are left with is an unhealthy, addicted society and a poisoned environment. There is no virtue nor temperance, nor is there any greater meaning, no charity nor faith. As always, thank you for watching.